Masechet Baba Mesia, Daf Sadi He. We're talking about the laws of the four Shomrim. We saw yesterday that there are 3 paragraphs, and the third one is about a Shoel, says Ki Yish'al. And here is where it gives the law of if the owner is not with working for the Shoel, then he has to pay. For honest, Nishbad Omet, but if the owner is there, then he does not have to pay. This law regarding the owner is said only regarding Shoel, so we're going to ask, what about the other one? Does it apply also to the previous 2 paragraphs? But first, we're going to ask, how do you know that a Shoel is liable in Geneva Va'aveda? It talks about Geneva Va'aveda in the first paragraph. It talks about Geneva here in the second paragraph. Im Ganavi Ganev, we learn Aveda also. But the third paragraph only mentions Nishbad and Met, but nothing about if it's lost or stolen. Geneva Va'aveda b'Shoel min elan. So we ask, how do you know that a borrower is liable if it gets lost or stolen? So maybe you'll say, I'll learn it by comparison to the cases of honest, of injury or death. And just as the borrower is liable if it gets injured or dies, so too it makes sense that he would be liable if it gets stolen or lost. However, we reject that, because when an animal is injured, seriously injured, or dies, there's nothing that the borrower can do to bring it back to life or to undo the injury. And so maybe that's why he's liable in those cases. But you cannot necessarily learn from there that he'd also be liable when it gets stolen or lost, where he can go and make an effort and bring it back. He can try to find the thief and get it back. Or if it was lost, he can search around and try to find it. So maybe he's not liable in those cases. Instead, he has to go and find it. So I can't necessarily learn from the cases of honest that the shoel also is liable in Geneva Va'aveda. Ela kiha detanya v'nishbad omet enli ela shevura ometa Geneva Va'aveda minayin. Good. So now we have a braita that asks this exact question. The Torah says that shoel is liable if it's injured or dies. I only know in those 2 cases. What about if it's stolen or lost? Amad kal vachomer u'ma shomer sachar shepatur mishevura umeta chaya b'geneva va'aveda shoel shechaya b'shevura umeta Ayanodin shechaya b'geneva va'aveda v'zehu kal vachomer she'en alav teshubah. We can learn it from a kal vachomer from the previous paragraph from shomer sachar, who is not liable for cases of honest where it gets injured or dies. And yet, the Shomer Sachar is liable for Geneva Va'aveda. So therefore, a borrower who is more liable, more responsible, because he has to pay also for injury and death, which is honest, all the more so he will have to pay for Geneva Va'aveda if it gets lost or stolen, which is not honest. It just that it got lost and stolen. So all the more so he would have to pay. He was even more responsible. A shoel is more responsible than a shomer sachar. So all the more so he should have to pay in these cases. And the Baraita comments, this kal vachomer cannot be refuted. Now we ask, what does that mean cannot be refuted? This is going to be an invitation to try to refute it. Mai en alav teshubah v'chi tema ika lemifrach. Oh, you might try to refute it by saying that a shomer sachar does pay double if he claims that it was stolen by armed bandits. A shomer sachar, although he is liable to pay in Geneva, that's just if it's a regular ganav who comes unarmed. But if it comes armed, then that makes it more like honest. Or what is he supposed to do? Give up his life for this? And so therefore he can claim, oh, sorry, it was stolen by an armed bandit, and he swears to the fact. So and then he doesn't pay anything. But if we find out later that he in fact stole it himself, 2 witnesses say so, then the shomer sachar will have to pay double. So we see that there is a stringency in shomer sachar that has to pay double, unlike a shoel who only pays the principal right up front no matter what, but will not have to pay double. So maybe this will break the kal vachomer, because shomer sachar actually has a stringency. We say no, afilu hachi karna de shoel adifa. Like we argued yesterday, that the principal paid by the shoel, no matter what, whether even if someone else really did steal it, an armed bandit really did steal it, he has to pay the principal. That is a greater stringency than the possibility of paying double, because he's swearing, maybe falsely, that it was stolen by armed bandit, and then there's a less than a 50-50 chance that two witnesses will come and say that he himself stole it. So yeah, it's possible that he'll have to pay double, but it's more likely that he won't have to pay anything at all, and therefore we established that the shoel is more stringent, and therefore the kal vachomer works. Or another way to interpret it is that if it was taken by armed bandits, actually the shomer sachar would not have to pay double, because you only have to pay double when it's a case of a ganav. Whereas a gazlan, so the law of paying double does not apply to a gazlan. Not even the gazlan himself does not have to pay double. Now, someone comes, even though they're out in the open during the day and taking something, usually that's a ganav. He's not scared, he just comes. But if he's coming with weapons, that means he is scared because he needs a weapon. And so coming during the day with weapons, showing that you're scared, is equivalent to a robber in the night that comes in and doesn't want to be seen because he's scared. So we say those two are the same and do not have to pay double. And this would be another way to answer that, in fact, there's no way to refute this kal vachomer, because the shomer sachar will not have to pay double if he claims listim mezuyan. All right, good. Ashkechan lechiyuv liftor minalan. So now, so far, we know that shoel is liable in geneva v'aveda. That's for liability. But now we want to know, what about liftor? If it gets lost or stolen with the owners there, the owner is in the employment of the borrower at the same time, and it gets lost and stolen. How do I know that we don't have to pay? He doesn't have to pay in that case. See, the Torah only said that a shoel, in the case of ones, shivura, and meta, if the owner is there, then the shoel does not have to pay. But how do I know that that applies now also to geneva v'aveda, that they don't have to pay if the owner is there? So you say, well, maybe we'll learn it from shivura meta. The shoel does not have to pay when the owner is there in those cases, but that's not the same, because in those two cases are honest, they're unavoidable accidents. So there it makes more sense that the shoel would not have to pay. You can't learn from there to geneva v'aveda, which are not honest, and that he also wouldn't have to pay. Ela gamar mishomer sachar. Oh, we'll learn it from shomer sachar. In the case of shomer sachar, he is liable in geneva v'aveda normally, and if the owner is there, then he doesn't have to pay, and so we'll learn from there to shoel. But that's not good, because shomer sachar gufei minalan. How do we even know that this law of im be'alav imo, if the owner is there, it's only said regarding shoel? How do we even know that that's true for a shomer sachar, that the shomer sachar will not have to pay geneva v'aveda if the owner is there working with him? Gamri chiyuva de shomer sachar mechiyuva de shoel. Ma lehalan bebe'alim patur, afkan bebe'alim patur. Oh, we can learn the liability of a shomer sachar from the liability of a shoel, and just like a shoel, if the owner is there, does not have to pay. So too, regarding shomer sachar, if the owner is there, he does not have to pay. So we're kind of making a full circle. We learn the law of if im be'alav imo, if the owner is there, he doesn't have to pay. We learn that from shoel to shomer sachar, and once we know for shomer sachar, in the case of ones, so then we can learn that back in the case of geneva v'aveda, that applies also to shoel. Okay, b'may gamar I b'may masinu ikal mifrake debarchinan sheken ones. Now, what system, what method are you using to learn this? If you're using a me masinu, that means an analogy. Something is true in this case, it should be the same in an equivalent, similar case. But then we can refute that, because that is talking about ones. We only, in shoel, we only know that in the case of ones, of injury or death, that's when im be'alav imo, when the owner is there, then he doesn't have to pay. You cannot learn that to a case of geneva va'aveda. So for even to a shomer sachar. So that won't work. Ela amar kera v'chi yish'al vav mosif al inyan rishon v'yilamed alyon mitachton. Rather, we're going to use not a memasinu, but rather a hekesh. You see here that the third paragraph starts v'chi yish'al ish. And the paragraph before, the first paragraph starts ki yiten. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing before that. Second paragraph starts ki yiten, and then this paragraph says vechi. So first of all, it has a vav, and even without the vav, these are back to back. So we're going to use that to say, since they are back to back, and all the more so because it has a vav, right? The vav connects the last paragraph to the middle paragraph, and therefore we can learn the elyon, that means the second paragraph regarding shomer sachar, from tachton, from the third paragraph regarding the shoel. And so now I know that just like a shoel does not have to pay when the owner is there, so too a shomer sachar does not have to pay when the owner is there. Good. And that we can learn not only is true for ones, it applies to shomer sachar in everything that the shomer sachar is liable in. That's how the hekesh is working. And so now we know that the shomer sachar also will not be liable in geneva va'aveda if the owner is working there. And since I know that, then I can use that to learn the shoel as well. והקטה שואל משומר שכר לא גם מעדיק על מפרח, מה לשומר שכר שכן פטור בשבורה ומתה? זאת אומרת, בשואל שחייב בשבורה ומתה, but now we say not so fast. You can't learn that because we can't learn shoel from shomer sachar because we can reject that. Shomer sachar does not have to pay for ones. So can we learn from there to shoel who does have to pay for ones? So you can't bring that comparison. Ela geneva va'aveda b'shoel lechiyuva minelan degamar mishomer sachar deyola b'minadin leyot kanidon. Ma geneva va'aveda d'shomer sachar b'be'alim patur af geneva va'aveda d'shoel nam b'be'alim patur. So rather, we're going to bring a bunch of elements of what we saw above together. And so we ask, how do you know in the first place that a shoel is liable in geneva va'aveda? Remember, there's the question we started with. So it doesn't say geneva va'aveda regarding shoel. How do you know shoel is liable? Well, we learned it from shomer sachar. Okay, good. Now, and we learned it from a kal vachomer. However, we have a rule of dayo. Whenever you have a kal vachomer, you can only learn sufficiently up to the source to the target. So just like the source is geneva va'aveda regarding shomer sachar, and there he is exempt when if the owner is there. We just learned that from the hekesh, the vav that's in between those two paragraphs. So geneva va'aveda regarding shomer sachar, we've established if the owner is there is patur, and that is the source from which we learned through a kal vachomer that geneva va'aveda regarding shoel is patur. So dayo lavo bin hadin liot kanidon, and therefore also shoel is not liable if the owner is there, also for geneva va'aveda. So you see how interestingly the two paragraphs work together. The third paragraph informs on the second, and then the second informs on the first as well. And it all works out because you can't learn, you only learn as much as the source can tell you. So if it's true for shomer sachar, it's certainly true for shoel, that if the owner is there, he doesn't have to pay. All is going to the opinion that says the principle of dayo, but there is an opinion that does not have the principle of dayo. This opinion says once you open up a kal vachomer, then you can learn from the source to the target even more than the source. So in that case, how are you going to know that shoel is liable, is rather not liable when it comes to the be'alav imo? Maybe you could learn, since you learn once you open up a kal vachomer and you say that a shomer sachar is liable for Geneva Vaveda, and we learn that too, Shoel, we'll learn it even more than the source, and we would say you're liable even if Ba'alav Imo. So how do you know? Ela Amar Kera V'chi Yish'al, Vav Mosif Al Inyan Rishon, Vilamed Alyon Mitachton, V'Tachton Me'alyon. Oh, we can go back to the Hekesh and use that Vav that's in between the two paragraphs, and just like the Mosif is the third paragraph is adding to the second, and we're learning both ways. The second paragraph can learn from the third paragraph, and the third paragraph can learn from the second paragraph. And since there's a two-way street there, so we can use the full circle, and we can derive as follows. Im Ba'alav Imo applies to Shoel. Well, it's going to apply to Shomer Sachar also. Okay, good, because we learn it up. Now, Shomer Sachar, when we learn it there, it applies to Geneva Vaveda, because that's Shomer Sachar is Chayab in Geneva Vaveda, says so. And then we'll take that, now that we have that all together, and we'll move it back in the other direction of the highway and say, so too, Shoel is Chayav Geneva Vaveda, but the same as where we learned it from, not because of a Kavachomer, but rather because of a Hekesh, and so that's limited to if the owner is only if the owner is not there. If the owner is there, then even the shoel is not liable. Okay, itmar peshia bebe'alim peligi baravacha v'ravina chad amar chayav v'chad amar patur. So far, we've established that if the owner is there, then the Torah only says, the third paragraph, that a shoel is not liable for honest if the owner is there. We've just established that that's true also for Geneva V'Aveda, both for Shomer Sachar and for shoel. If the owner is there, they don't have to pay. But now we want to ask, what if the shomer is negligent? Negligence, even a shomer chinam, generally is liable. So everybody's liable in the case of negligence. So what if the shomer is negligent, but the owner is also employed at the same time? So do we say that since the owner is employed, we apply that rule in Ba'alav Imo also for negligence? Is a machloket between Ravacha and Ravina. One says chayav, one says patur. Let's see the sources. Man damar chayav kasavar mikra nidrash lefanav velo lifnei fanav. So the one who says chayav will say that when someone is negligent, they are liable even if the owner is there. They think that when you make a hekesh, you can only do it for one paragraph, but you can't go two paragraphs earlier. So since the Im Ba'alav Imo is stated in the third paragraph regarding shoel, so we can go there to one paragraph before for Shomer Sachar, but you can't extend it to two steps all the way back to Shomer Chinam. Since it does not apply to Shomer Chinam, there is no exemption in Shomer Chinam who is liable for negligence. There's no exemption even if the owner is there. And therefore, anyone is liable if they are negligent, even if the owner is there. Hilkach im Ba'alav Imo, Shomer Chinam lo ketib. Right, in Ba'alav Imo in the third paragraph is not mentioned in Shomer Chinam, doesn't say that explicitly. And negligence, the law of negligence is not mentioned in Shomer Sachar and Shoel. It's only mentioned in the first paragraph over here. Al kol devar pesha. That's talking about negligence. And so it doesn't say pesha or negligence in the second or third paragraphs. Hilkach b'shomer sachar b'shomer l'chiyuv atya b'kavachomer. Now, how do you even know that shomer sachar and shoel are liable in negligence? That we could say from a kavachomer. If a shomer chinam, who's the least responsible, is liable in negligence, then all the more so the next two. So that kavachomer we will all across the board, all the way down the line. That works. That logic of kavachomer works. Avav b'alim liftor af b'shomer sachar b'shoel lo. But will we exempt the shomer sachar and the shoel if the owner is there regarding negligence? No, we're not going to do that. Why? My tama ki ketiv en ba'alav imo lo yishalem ashoel v'ashomer sachar ahane chiyuveh dichtib behu behedja hu demichtav. Because when it says if the owner is there, then they don't pay, that is said only regarding the second two paragraphs. It says explicitly regarding shoel, and we applied it through a hekesh also to the middle paragraph of shomer sachar. So that exemption of when the owner is there only applies applies to the liabilities that are explicitly mentioned in those paragraphs. That's the liabilities of Geneva Aveda and of Ones. But we're not going to apply it also to the liability of a Shomer Chinam. So even though it's true, we learn from a Kavachomer that not only Shomer Chinam, but also the other two are liable in Ones, but the exemption for Imbalav Imo apply only to the second two paragraphs, and don't go back to the first, because it's only in the third paragraph, and you can go back one with Hekesh, but you cannot go back two. That explains the opinion that says Hayav. Man damar patur kasabar mikra nidrash lefanav ve'lifnei fanav v'chi ketiv Imbalav Imo ashomer chinam name ketiv. Now, the opinion that says that even when the shomer is negligent, if the owner is there working for him, the shomer does not have to pay. This opinion will say that you can, when you have a hekesh, you can even go two links, and you can apply it not only to the one paragraph before, but even to two paragraphs before. Even if there's no vav in this case between the first and second paragraph, still, this opinion says you can make a hekesh. And therefore, when it says im ba'alav imo in the third paragraph, that applies not only to the second, but even to the first, to shomer chinam. Applies to the liability of shomer chinam, which is pesha, when he's negligent, and even when he's negligent, if the owner is there working, then he does not pay. Tenan. Now we're going to have a couple of challenges against this opinion that says patur. תנן, השואל הפרה ושאל בעליה אימה, השואל הפרה ושכר בעליה אימה, שאל בעליה או שכרן, ואחר כך שאל הפרה ומתה פטור, ואילו שומר חינם לא קטנה. This is a paraphrase of our Mishnah. It's the same content, just slightly different wording. So if someone borrows a cow and borrows the owner together with it, or borrows a cow and rents the owner with it, or borrows the owner and or rents the owner and afterwards borrows the cow. The cow is always borrowed, shoel, in all three of the cases. Even if the owner, it doesn't matter if you pay the owner or not. Now, in all these cases, if it dies, the animal dies, since the owner was an employed the entire time, either from before or simultaneously to the borrowing of the cow, the owner, the renter, does not have to pay. Now notice that it mentions shoel, only borrowing the animal, doesn't mention shomer chinam. So you see that shomer chinam would be liable, that the owner being there together with the animal, for if it's a shomer chinam, there's no exemption. So this is a challenge to the one who says patur. So we answer, l'ta'amich shomer sachar mikatani. Okay, it also doesn't say shomer sachar here. It only says shoel, right? Ela tana mileta dechtiva behedja katani dacha midrasha la katani. So it's evident that the Mishnah is only mentioning cases that are explicit in the Torah, and that's only shoel, that if you borrow an animal, then and the owner is with it, then you don't have to pay. Whereas things that are derived from a derasha, it does not is not citing in this Mishnah. And since shomer sachar is derived from a hekesh, it's not brought here, and that's why shomer chinam also, which the one who says patur thinks it's from a double hekesh, also doesn't mention, and it doesn't need to mention. This is, by the way, a very interesting Gemara, in that it's noting a distinction between the peshat of the Torah and something that's learned from a midrash. Even if they're both deoraita, but still there is a distinction between them, and at least in terms of what the Mishnah would mention. Okay, so we answer that question, but now we have a baraita that does mention socher slash shomer sachar, as we'll see. Tashema she'ala v'sha'al be'alei ha'ima, sechara v'sachar be'alei ha'ima, she'ala v'sachar be'alei ha'ima, sechara v'sha'al be'alei ha'ima, af al pi she'aba'alim osin melacha b'makom acher umeta patur. This has four cases, but they're all simultaneous, and so it's bringing in another new case that's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Here we have the first case, if he borrowed the animal and he also borrowed the owner. Or second case, if he rented the animal and also rented the owner, so renting for both. Third case, if he borrowed the animal and rented the owner. And then the last case is the flip side, if he rented the animal and borrowed the owner. In all these cases, even if the owner is doing work elsewhere, he's not necessarily working directly with his animal or near his animal, he's working on the other side of a field or in a different field, but he's under the employment of the renter or borrower, and the animal dies, he is exempt. So what you see here is that it includes not only shoel but also socher. Now, sevaruha hamaneh biyuda hidamar socher keshomer sachar dameh. So let's assume for the moment that we're following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says socher and shomer sachar are the same. Vaha haytana katani miletadat yatem midrasha vilu shomer chinam lo katane. Look how it included the middle category. It mentioned socher, but the same thing is shomer sachar. And so this baraita, the Tana of this baraita, does bother to mention in a case that is learned from a derasha. So, but yet, look how it only mentions the third paragraph, that's explicit, the shoel, and the middle paragraph, that's learned from a derasha, but it doesn't mention shomer chinam. So you see that the author of this baraita does not think that a shomer chinam would be exempt in a case of negligence. Hamaneh Rabbi Meir damar socher keshomer chinam dameh v'tana shomer chinam v'hu adin lo shomer sachar. Oh, we can answer. Actually, the author of this baraita is Rabbi Meir. And he says that shomer socher, it does mention socher, and the socher has the same law as a shomer chinam, and therefore it did mention that category because it mentions shomer, it mentioned socher, and that would be the same as shomer chinam. And then I could learn the same would be true for shomer sachar, the middle category. In other words, this baraita mentions the third category, shoel, where it's explicit, and that he's the most liable, and it also mentioned the first category. Although it didn't say shomer chinam explicitly, but it says socher, and that's the same as shomer chinam. And since I have those two, I have the outer limits, so obviously the middle one, it would be true also. And so maybe it does mention something that you learned from a derasha, and yes, it even mentions the shomer chinam. So that could be one answer. Socher kesad meshalem, Rabbi Meir omer keshomer sachar, Rabbi Yehuda omer keshomer chinam. Or, instead of saying that it's the opinion of Rabbi Meir, we'll stick with Rabbi Yehuda. However, we're going to switch the opinions around as Rabba Bar Avu does in his version of the Braita, because he says, how does a socher, a renter, where does he fit in? Rabbi Meir says he's like a shomer sachar, but Rabbi Yehuda says he's a shomer chinam. So this answer would work the same as the previous one did, that since this Braita mentions socher, and it is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and that is the same law as shomer chinam. So therefore, in effect, it did mention shomer chinam, and it still says that the shomer chinam does not have to pay when the owner is there. Well, what would a shomer chinam have to pay for? Only negligence. So that's how he can explain this baraita. אמר רב המנונה, לעולם הוא חייב עד שתהא פרה וחורש בה, חמור ומחמר אחריה, ועד שהוא בעלים משעת שאילה עד שעת שבורה ומתה. על מה כסבר בעליו עמו, הכולה מילתה משמע. Rav Hamnuna gives an extreme reading of this phrase, בעליו עמו, that the owner is with it. It means it has to be totally, literally with it. And therefore he says that the renter will be liable unless the cow, if he rented a cow, then the owner has to be plowing together with the cow. He has to be right there with the cow, plowing right alongside it. Or if he rented a donkey, then the owner has to be driving the donkey, has to be there with it. It's not sufficient that he be employed and be working somewhere else. Furthermore, it has to be that the owner was employed from the very beginning, from the time of the borrowing, and continues to be employed all the way until the time that the animal is injured or dies. He has to be employed the entire time. It's not sufficient if he was employed at the time when he borrowed the animal, but then the owner finished his work and went home, and the borrower still has the animal, and then it dies. Then the borrower is liable. So you see that Rav Hamnuna says Ba'alav imo applies in all ways. Good. Now we're going to actually challenge and reject both of these aspects of Rav Hamnuna's halacha. Mativ Rava, she'ala v'shal ba'aleima, sechara v'schar ba'aleima, sechara v'shal ba'aleima, she'ala v'sachar ba'aleima, afapi she'ba'alim osin melacha b'makom acher umeta patur. Ma'ila v'melacha acheret. We're quoting the Braita that we just cited above that says, if someone borrowed the animal and the owner, or rented the animal and the owner, or rented the animal and borrowed the owner, or borrowed the animal and rented the owner, and it's all at the same time, even though the owner is working in a different type of work, in a different place, is doing work, but in a different place, and the animal dies, nevertheless, the law of im be'alav imo applies, and the borrower or renter does not have to pay. So now, when it says doing work in a different place, what do you mean a different place? Doesn't that mean he's doing a different work? He's not working with his animal. He's doing work in a different place with a different animal, or not with an animal. He's not working together with his animal, and yet it applies. Challenge to Rav Hamnuna. And the answer is law be'ota melacha. He's working with the same work. Elamai makom acher. So why does it matter if he's in a different place? What does that mean, a different place? Oh, it means not very far away. It means the animal's plowing over here, and then the owner is a few feet ahead. Maybe he's 100 feet ahead, all the way down the row, and he's loosening the ground so that when the animal comes, the animal will have an easier time to plow it. So he is in fact working in the same work as the animal, just not physically in the same area. But that's why he's not liable, because he is in fact doing the same work. Okay, so that's an answer, but we're going to reject it. Since the sefa has a different phrase, it uses that the owner is working alongside al gaba, literally on top of it, but on top of it in the sense of, why are you standing on top of me, meaning why are you right next to me? So when it's working together with it in proximity. So if the sefa says that phrase, that means in the resha, when it says in a different place, that means it's a different melacha altogether, right? Tikatani sefa she'ala ve'achar kach sha'al be'aleha secharav af ve'achar kach sachar be'aleha ima af agav she'be'alim chorshin al gaba umeta chayav. Here it says that if he borrowed the animal and only afterwards borrowed the owner, or rented the animal and only afterwards rented the owner. So here, the owner was not under the employment of the borrower at the time that he got the animal. So therefore, even if the owner is plowing right there together with his animal, they're right near each other doing the same exact work, if it dies, the renter is liable because of the timing issue that he had the animal before he got the owner. So you see, since it says al gaba here means that it's working together with it, that means makom acher means he's not working together with it, right? So we say amri resha v'sefa be'ota melacha. No, I can still say that both are talking about that the owner is working in the same type of work that the animal is. Just the question is he right next to it, or is he far away from it, and loosening the field ahead of it. And the Resha and the Sefa are both adding a novel law that wants to say it's true even in these cases. The Resha is adding a novel law that by teaching us that even though it's not right next to it, but it's doing the same work. So because they were hired simultaneously, or at least the owner was under employment first, and then the animal came, so he is not, the renter is not liable, and it doesn't matter that they're physically far away. And the Sefa is coming to add a novelty that even if they're working right next to each other, because the owner was not in employment at the time of the borrowing of the animal, he is liable. So that's the chidush. But we reject this. If you tell me the simple reading of the Baraita, that the Resha is talking about a different category of work altogether. He's working in a different field, not with his animal, and the Sefa is always working with the same animal, then that would be a real chidush. But if you're telling me, as you just did, that the Resha and Sefa are both in the same work, it's just that here he's very close to the animal and there he's down the row, That's not a chidush. That's all. Obviously, that's talking about the same halacha. When you say that if the category of the owner has to be working on the same work, it doesn't mean he has to be 1 foot away or 5 feet away, 10 feet away. It doesn't matter. He's working together with the animal, whether he's close to it or not. And so you don't have to even add anything to say, even if. That's not a chidush at all. That's obvious. So therefore, it's obvious that the better reading of the baraita is it's saying that only thing that matters is that the owner be employed before or at the same time as getting the animal. That's what's essential, and it's not essential that they be working on the same thing. And therefore, that's a rejection of Rav Hamnuna's opinion that they have to be working on the very, very same thing. Okay, ve'od. Now we rejected the first part of Rav Hamnuna. We're going to reject also the second part. Tanya, mimashma shenemar im ba'alav imo lo yishalem eni odei she'im ba'alav en imo shalem yishalem. Since one pasuk says that if the owner is there together with him, he doesn't pay. So I cannot figure out on my own that if the owner is not there, then he will have to pay. Like, I don't need one or the other. Ela mata mudomar be'alav en imo. So why do I need that pasuk that says if the owner is not there, he pays? לומר לך, היה עמו בשעת שאלה, אין צריך להיות עמו בשעת שבורה ומתה. היה עמו בשעת שבורה ומתה, צריך להיות עמו בשעת שאלה. It comes to teach us that if the owner was there at the beginning when he borrowed the animal, then the owner does not have to be there at the time of the injury or the death. All that matters is that he's there at the beginning. And if he was there at the time of the injury or death, then he also has to be there at the time of the borrowing, meaning it really doesn't matter whether the owner is there or not at the time of the injury or death. He only has to be there at the beginning when he borrows it. So you see, that's the only thing that's important. It does not have to be there at the time of injury or death. That rejects the second part of Rav Hamnuna. And we learned the same thing from another baraita. V'tanya idach mimashma shene'emar be'alav en imo shalem yishalem and yodea she'im be'alav imo lo yishalem. Ask the same question the other way around. If the pasuk says that when the owner is not there, he has to pay, can I figure out from that if the owner is there, then he doesn't have to pay? Ela matamud lomar im be'alav imo lomar lecha kevan sheyas'a mirshut mashil sha'a achat be'ba'alim umeta patur tiyubta de Rav Hamnuna tiyubta. So instead, what does the pasuk, if the owner is there, teach? It teaches us that as long as the animal left the domain of the owner who is giving the animal, who is mash'il the animal, for one moment with the owner's underemployment and it dies, then it's patur. In other words, as long as at the very beginning, when he borrowed it, even the owner was under employment, even if that was just for a short time, even just for one moment, 1 hour, and then that's it. Then his employment was over. Since it starts that way, even if for the whole rest of the time, including when it actually dies or gets injured, the owner is no longer in employment, nevertheless, the renter or borrower is not liable. So we see, again, this baraita rejects the second point of Rav Hamnuna, and now we have rejected conclusively the entire statement of Rav Hamnuna. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.